The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to St. Luke. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to share the inheritance with me." He replied to him, "Friend, who appointed me as your judge and arbiter?" Then he said to the crowd, "Take care to guard against all greed, for though one may be rich, one's life does not consist of possessions." Then he told them a parable. There was a rich man whose land produced a bountiful harvest. He asked himself, "What shall I do? For I do not have the space to store my harvest." And he said, "This is what I shall do. I shall tear down my barns and build larger ones. There I shall store all my grain and other goods. And I shall say to myself, now as for you, you have so many good things stored up for many years. Rest, eat, drink, be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this night your life will be demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, to whom will they belong? Thus will it be for all who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich in what matters to God." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. For what profit comes to man from all the toil and anxiety of heart with which he has labored under the sun? This question asked of us in Ecclesiastes in our first reading, I found to be such a great question, especially personally for this time of year working at the University of Notre Dame. You see, in just a few short weeks, the community that is here working actively, preparing, will welcome back just about 8,000 undergrads and 4,000 graduate students. It's a Herculean effort to think about all the varying details. It requires all types of parts and pieces and individuals to contribute in order for us to pull this one off. Spoiler alert, there are still a few things left to do. At least I can say that is certainly the case in campus ministry where I work. And while we still have a few unresolved questions, the part that I also must grapple with is that there will be some things that will be left undone, that we simply could not get there. And for that, I blame the summer. I know, odd excuse, but I blame it. Here's my logic. You see, when commencement occurs, right about mid-May, you think to yourself, August, that's so far away. August, while far away, and May quickly turns into June, and June somehow quickly morphs into the 4th of July. And at that particular point, as the last fireworks smolders on the 4th, there's some unofficial alarm that kicks off. And it says to all who are listening, hey, August isn't that far away. And then before you know it, it's the 4th of August, and we're thinking about the return. Admittedly, we get to this point in the year where I think to myself, frankly, I'd rather have the students here because I'm so tired of talking about them. I'd rather they just be here so we can work together with them. And I bring that up because this is a little bit of something that I'm going through. I don't know what your world looks like, what those things that can sometimes be perceived as anxiety-producing or toil-inducing may look like in your world, but I can say, as I imagine the next couple weeks, there's a reality that I reflect deeply upon this question asked of us in Ecclesiastes. For what profit comes to man from all the toil and anxiety of heart with which he has labored under the sun? Now let's be clear, work is absolutely essential and critical. It is a part of what dignifies the gift that we have been given by God. Think about this beautiful basilica. Had it not been for the work of the hands of so many, the creativity, the sacrifice, the willingness to give of oneself to something far larger than who we are as individuals, we would not be able to be gathered here in this sacred and beautiful place of prayer. Yet this passage from Ecclesiastes, though, asks us to consider the reason for our work. It's not debating the importance of work. It believes that to be just and necessary. But it is asking of us the question to ponder, what is the reason for our work? I would offer my brothers and sisters that one caution that we must be aware of is that if the reason for our work is rooted in our ego, those moments in which we think to ourselves, I hope they can see my great success here, or I hope that they will be impressed with what I've accomplished, or don't you know who I am? I am the contributing factor to this big and great thing. If it is those things, if those are the motivations for our work, we will have a life in which we encounter both toil and anxiety. And we would do ourselves well to ponder and to reflect upon St. Paul's letter to the Colossians today. Put to death, then, the parts that are earthly, immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and the greed that is idolatry. St. Paul rightly points out and recognizes that if the nature of our work is rooted in these things, ultimately, what we seek to accomplish will invariably, on some level, spoil. It will not fully elicit that which is intended because God is not present in our egos. God is not present in us making it all about ourselves. Look at the life of Jesus. We see an individual who continually gives his life away to the point of death on the cross. We see in our gospel, as Jesus says, possessions are not the thing. Titles are not the thing. This is not what you are called to do. The heartbeat of the gospel invites us into something more profound and something more radical. And this is the opportunity that we have to reflect. I think about often if we were to root ourselves in these elements that St. Paul points out. It's kind of like cooking with ingredients that are past their due date. Certainly, we can cover the taste a little bit by throwing a little bit more sauce or a little bit more salt, but the reality is it will never bring about the freshness that truly great and prime ingredients can provide. So it then offers us the chance to reflect more deeply on if ego-driven work is not what we're to be about, then what is the nature of our lives? How are we to go about living differently, joyfully, purposefully in this world? And it is this, from my estimation. We seek after authentic truth and beauty. We seek after, as St. Paul says, that which is above. We seek to imitate and model our lives after Jesus. But instead of talking in these platitudes, I want to provide an example because I believe the gospel, this parable in particular, provides for us a great example of exactly what is afforded us through the rich tradition of our faith. So Jesus has asked this question. Please get my brother to share his inheritance with me. And Jesus immediately grapples and says, well, am I the judge and the arbiter of all these things? But so as to make a point, let me tell you this parable. There was once a rich man. There was once a rich man who was blessed with a bountiful harvest. And when placed with the decision to make, he asks himself, well, what shall I do with all this? Because my barns are not large enough to handle all it is that I have acquired. Now, off the top of my head, off the top of our heads perhaps, we could think of a variety of possibilities here. One, he could have sold the excess and he could have given all that he had earned to the poor. Or he could have taken the excess and donated it. No doubt there were needy people in this individual's time and place. But instead, what he chooses to do is to knock down his barns and to rather build larger ones so that he could acquire and keep everything for himself. Jesus, always the shrewd teacher, offers us this line at the end. You fool, this night your life will be demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, to whom will they belong? Now we can recognize on one level that is certainly a harsh consequence. This individual who had received much Think about the work that he had put in. He had put seed in the soil, he had property, but beyond that, everything else, all the other variables, that was all God-given, but he could not realize it. So Jesus' point is clear. Do not believe that all the success that comes your way is solely for your own purpose and benefit. It is, in fact, to be given away freely. This grain should have been given away freely so that others might benefit. This person's offense is ultimately being rooted in their ego. Look at me. Look at what I've accomplished. I'm so successful now that I can knock down my barns and build larger ones so that I can live a life of ease. It's so contrary to the heartbeat of the gospel, a gospel that continually reminds us that God, our loving God, freely creates, freely loves, and freely gives our lives away. This is an invitation, my brothers and sisters, for us to do the same. And it is incredibly complex for us to do so because we live in a time and a place that suggests that we need to get what we can get while we can get it. But that does not bring about life. It does not bring about joy. In fact, it oftentimes brings about a sense of drudgery, toil, and anxiety. Because if all we are reliant upon is ourselves, how does that align with our faith? How does that align with the example of Jesus? How might we be a part of something much larger than ourselves? And this is where we have a great opportunity to be countercultural. We have this great and wonderful invitation by our God that says, trust me, follow me, believe that I will not let you down, that I have come to call you for something greater and more profound than what you can otherwise imagine. And so here becomes the great moment of decision. Will our lives be ultimately about our own egos, ensuring that we are well regarded by the people we want to be regarded by? Or will our lives be rooted most profoundly in giving them away for the greater glory of God? Will they be rooted in trust, a God who invites us and invites us to something more profound than we can otherwise imagine? And so I was thinking about this, a nice way of going about and imagining how we might think about it even in this week ahead as we practice this. What would it be like to say, I'm changing a diaper right now, it's for the greater glory of God. I'm listening to a friend right now, it's for the greater glory of God. I'm working on a habit that I need to change, it's for the greater glory of God. This is not for my own self-edification, but it is in fact for the greater glory of God, a God who invites us into a profound and joyful life. You see, my brothers and sisters, our lives are not ones of toil and anxiety. If allowed, if we deepen our trust in God in such a profound way, the toil becomes a vocation in response to God's invitation to come and follow, and the anxiety turns to trust. May it be so in our lives that we are men and women of vocation and trust who give all that we have away for the greater glory of God.